Joining us on the Bison Automotive Live Line this morning, James Faluszczak, former priest and abuse survivor, and we're talking about the latest of what we heard yesterday, a review board overlook of several alleged inappropriate relationships and several Buffalo priests. James, thanks for joining us this morning. We really have been zeroing in on the claims against Buffalo priest Joseph Gatto. This board said that there was no connection between Gatto and Canisius High School student Devin Waring's death by suicide back in 2017. But a lot of people are still wondering who exactly to trust. What was your reaction when you saw this yesterday?
Good morning, Brian, and good morning, Buffalo. My initial reaction was that I wasn't surprised that Father Gatto was returned to ministry. It seems to me that the case really hinges upon whatever happened, whatever was discussed in that confession between Gatto and the former Canisius student. And all Gatto had to do was simply say that it was confessional material, that he couldn't talk about it. The church, the independent review board, the bishop would not have tried to tread on that in any way. It's considered off limits to talk about anything that happened in confession. And the mother of this boy spoke eloquently in the federal court in the bankruptcy proceeding, and Bishop Fisher heard her testimony and called for the investigation. That's all laudable and certainly courageous on the mom's part. But really, it underlines the fact that confessional secrecy can be an impediment to ever knowing what really happened in this case. We just don't know.
We don't know is how you're taking this. I think a lot of people are looking at who to trust. This review board, it's kind of, well, maybe unknown to a lot of people. Who makes up this review board, and why should people trust their findings?
Well, first of all, there's nothing independent about this review board. It is appointed by the Bishop of Buffalo, and this retired Buffalo police detective who was hired by the diocese to investigate this case was on the payroll of the diocese in order to conduct her investigation. She reached out to me about a month ago and asked me whether I would cooperate in their investigation. And I took a minute to think about it, but immediately said yes. Of course I would. She was reaching out to me because they had in their file a letter that I had written to Bishop Richard Malone stating the fact that I had revealed my allegation against Gatto to my home bishop back in 2014 when I left ministry. I subsequently wrote a letter to Malone. I subsequently wrote a letter to Pope Francis asking him to consider my allegation against Gatto. And all of that was ignored. None of that was ever followed up on until this police detective reached out to me, but then she didn't follow up. That was only the first of 4 allegations against Father Joseph Gatto. And this boy who committed suicide after confession was the 4th. And it just seems really unreasonable to me that we would call any of this independence.
You know, I want to ask, there's been no decision made on Gatto's next assignment, but, you know, this has happened in a lot of cases where there's been an accusation or two or something like this where the priest is removed, but then depending on what is found, whether it's by this review board or somebody else, the priest may return to ministry. And, you know, we've even seen this in the, case of former Bishop Malone, where he has returned to preside over some certain ceremonies, confirmations, things like that. I mean, as a former priest yourself, does there come a point where you would look at this and say, you know what, there's too much here for me to be able to do the work I need to. Even regardless if you believe these accusations to be false, at some point it has to become untenable.
Really what it comes down to is that neither the review board or its investigators or the bishops who have impaneled it up to this point have been trustworthy. And you say untenable, it's essentially that. And my heart goes out to the good people in the pews who are practicing their faith every Sunday, and many of them every day in church, who really can't understand that this cover-up continues to go on.
Well, James, thanks for joining us once again. And if you want to hear more from James and others, you can do so inside of our story at WBEN.com. James Faluszczak joining us live, former priest and abuse survivor here on WBEN.